So you have been before the break and after the break. That seems a little unfair. So my talk is called No More Shelfware, Let's Drive. And there's a great big abstract, so we won't go through that. So who am I? Well, I'm lots of different things. A quilter and a gardener and a tester. But one of the things I am is an expert. And one of the problems with being an expert is that you think you're right. You think you know the answers. And of course you don't. You don't. And also, because I'm a consultant, I get called into companies where there are problems by the nature of what I do. So I see problems all the time, and I start thinking that's normal, and I see evidence that supports my opinions. And one of the things that I've seen over the years, bearing in mind I've got a career that goes back to programming in the 1970s, one of the things I've seen is people having a problem with test tools, and test tools not working well for them, and tools being difficult to use and ending up as shelfware. So shelfware is when we buy a tool, or we acquire a tool, or we build a tool, and it's too difficult, so we just put it on the shelf and forget it. So I think, oh, this is a problem, this is a problem, I can see this is a problem. And talking about it being a problem, and then thinking, well, have I got the evidence for this? So stop, think what I'm going to do next. And so I'm going back to school. I've come back to school. I am now a student again. So I'm doing some consultancy and things like that, but I'm a student. I've gone to the University of Malta because in their ICT department, they have a group who are investigating human aspects of software testing. So they're doing some really interesting research, like fitting EEG monitors to testers' heads and then giving them testing tasks to do and seeing what their brainwave patterns are. And they're doing some research to see if people have had ISTQB style training, or if they've been trained to be exploratory testers, are their brainwaves different? So it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of that sort of research. So I'm working with them now. I'm a student, I'm just enrolled on a PhD. I'm right back to the beginning of a learning curve, which looks like this. I decide I'm going to do a PhD because I want some rigor in what I'm doing. I apply to do that. I set up a research design. I learn how to do quantitative and qualitative methods. As I'm doing that, I change my research design. I'm asked to do a literature review. That changes my mind again. So it's just like endless iterating around, thinking, oh, I've got that wrong, I've got that wrong. It's a real change from being an expert. I'm like the stupidest person in the room now. It's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it because I'm allowed to make as many mistakes as I want. So I'm right in the middle of this. It's going to take me another 6 to 8 years because I'm doing it part-time. But I'm thinking about tools and what's the problem with them, if there is a problem with them at all. So here's my roadmap. I'm going to set the scene for you. I'm going to talk about a method we can use for assessing tools, and I'm going to talk about some discussion points that I'm raising. There will be no conclusions out of this because I'm 1 year into an 8-year process. Right, so my analogy is let's drive. There's a car company called Morgan. Have you ever heard of them? Some nods. So some people have heard of Morgan. Morgan is one of the car companies in the UK. It's been making cars for 100 years now, so you can see some of their cars there that they were making 100 years ago. And there's the little factory in Malvern where they make Morgan cars. So how much of their cars changed in 100 years, do you suppose? How much? Here's what they're selling at the moment. It's the same sort of car. It's a little roadster, it's open top, it's pretty, it's all handmade. Very, very expensive. So if you look in the Morgan factory, here's their production line. The cars are made out of beechwood and aluminium, and they're handcrafted. Every bit of them is handmade by a small group of people who work together to build individual cars. And they make a handful of cars, a small, small number each year. There's a huge waiting list for them. They're beautiful, they're expensive, they're really difficult to run. You have to be really interested in the idea that before you go out in the car, you lift the bonnet and you do things with spark plugs and you clean it all up. It's a quality car if you like fiddling around with car engines and going around very slowly and very noisily. On the other hand, what about the Kia automated production plant? These cars are mass produced, they're all identical, they come off the production line really quickly, it's all automated, there's robotics, the car is easy to drive, you don't have to look under the bonnet. It's a different experience. You can drive the car, but you're paying a different amount, you're getting a different experience. So this makes me think about test automation. There's been a big debate about whether testers need to be more technical in order to use the automation. And we could turn that round and say the automation needs to be easier to use in order that testers can use it. People with good domain knowledge and no technical skills can use the tools easily. Just like I can get into my car and drive it and I don't have to look under the bonnet. When I first learned to drive, I had to know about spark plugs and how to change them, but nowadays I don't, because the world has changed. So if on the left-hand side of that screen you can see a car like the one my father owned when I was a child, didn't have a starter motor. You had to crank the engine to start it. It was hard work. You had to keep the spark plugs clean. You had to change the fan belt and so on and so forth. And on the right-hand side, you can see automatic gear shifts. You can see a push-button gear shift. You can see a self-driving car. Just get in it, program where you want to go, sit back and enjoy, we hope. So, what are the problems with using automation tools and testing tools and actually development tools as well? Is it like a modern car where it's easy to change gear, or is it like my dad's old car where it's really difficult to drive? You have to be an engineer to drive the car. I'm going to tell you, when starter motors were invented, a lot of people were really worried because they said, now you don't need physical strength to start the car, women will be able to drive. Something that we must prevent at all costs. This was 100 years ago, so, you know, attitudes have changed. So here are some quotes from people and reports about problems with tools. Testers inexperienced in testing didn't see what the tool did not cover. So you have an inexperienced tester and you have a tool and people trust the tool and they don't know what it's really telling them. Testing stakeholders relied too heavily on automated testing. And therefore, they thought that the results could always be relied on. They didn't look behind the scenes. Oh, this would never happen. The tool vendor's marketing was overly optimistic. There's typical comments out of reports on problems with testing. Problems with infrastructure. So a report done in the US, this is not just about automated testing tools, it's generally around the infrastructure for software testing. Annual costs ranging from 22 to 59 billion pounds wasted money on problems with software testing infrastructure, including automation tools, in 1 year in the US. That's extraordinary, isn't it? So there are problems there. But they're not just problems for software testers. The developers also are working with a tool set that is not optimum. So a group called Alarming Development have made this statement that programming's so hard that normal people can't do it. They're saying the only way to deal with this problem is to reinvent programming to suit human cognitive skills. Because it's too difficult, too many people are trying to do it. It's no longer the domain just of specialists. Many people are writing apps and they don't have software engineering qualifications. They don't understand what they're doing. So do we stop them writing the apps, or do we give them the tool set that they can use? Modern programming languages are usability disasters, full of design mistakes inherited from earlier eras. Well, here's what some technical people on software projects were saying about their tools. Why would I want to use a tool called GitHub? Do you know what a Git is? It's a grumpy person, it's a horrible person. The Git company is called GitHub because the people who put it together thought it was funny to say, here's a place where a group of horrible grumpy people can gather together and moan. No, why would you want to use a tool that's telling you you're a horrible person? It's like working with something designed to be used by a 12-year-old boy in his bedroom in the 1980s. This is somebody talking about their software development kit. A lack of consideration for how people work and think. Basically, it's still the mindset that the human adapts to the computer and not vice versa. Now, why is this a problem? Because there are people clearly who are good developers and who are getting on with this set. And the problem is, we build software in our own image when we're supposed to be building it for the whole human race. But because we're sitting in an industry with a tool set that only a small number of people want to use or are able to use, we're encouraging into the industry people who are of the same mindset, and we're not reflecting the diversity of people outside the industry. So we're continuing to build software that's for us and not for the rest of the human race. And it's the same with the testing tools. The test tool marked all the tests as passed except one, but in fact, none of the tests marked as passed had actually run. This was a real project. This is in Dot Graham and Mark Fuster's book. It's one of the case studies. And what was happening was the client wasn't attached to the server. And the test tool just happily said everything had passed. And people spent ages trying to work out why this one particular test hadn't passed. It was the only one telling the truth. It was the only one that actually worked. Everybody's saying, well, you know, I can't see what the problem is. Why can't we release? Everything's marked green in the test tool. Let's go. This is about a static analyzer tool. Somebody did some research, a guy called Emerson Murphy Hill did some research on developers' use of static analysis tools and discovered that by and large, they don't understand what the tools are doing. So that's why they ignore the messages out of them, because they don't know what they mean. So now I want to know why raising a string exception is bad. Like, what should I be doing instead, man? Since it thinks it's a problem, none of these messages really help me. That's a developer talking. Too many geeks are making automation script piles for other geeks and calling it a tool. So, you know, it's actually, what are we doing? So, I've set the scene there. I'm going to show you a method that we could use potentially for helping us improve tools and automation, whether we're building it ourselves or buying it. And then I've got some discussion points. So user experience. We're very immature as a industry about user experience. And at the bottom level, people say, it's the stupid users, it's the stupid testers. If the testers were better at technology, they'd be able to use the tools. If the users understood computers, we wouldn't be having to write user guides for them. They're all idiots. If only everybody was as intelligent as we are. The next stage, people start saying, actually, why are they having problems? Do they always have to have problems? And then we're starting to get into an awakening of there is a problem out there. We are building software. Believe me, there are stats about this. We're building software for about 3% of the population. Lots of people aren't connected. Lots of people don't know how to use PCs. In the richest countries in the world. We're identifying problems. We're resolving problems, we're preventing them. Finally, we don't have problems. Most organisations are down in those first 3 levels. And this is with what we're delivering out to everybody else. And we're doing it to ourselves as well. So we can start to think about UX, and I'm calling this TX, User Experience for Testers, the tester experience of their tool set. We can identify who uses the tool. So those of you who are building tools, are you thinking about who are they for? Why are they using it? What do they want to do? What's their emotions? Are they under a set of stress because they're in the middle of a bad bit of the project and they're being asked for results and they can't get them because there's problems? Can we work out what the quality and use and internal quality attributes are that we need for this tool? Can we write stories, user stories about the people who are going to use the automation, and from those stories decide what it is they want the tools to use? Can we do a usability review on the tools before we buy it or start using it as part of what we're doing in the tool acquisition process? So, who's using these tools? Who uses the test automation? Could be a developer, could be a test engineer, could be a user tester. somebody who knows the business domain but doesn't know technology. Could be a test manager, could be a product owner, could be an automation specialist, could be a domain specialist. There's a whole range of people there. Some of them, it's reasonable to suppose they have some technical ability. Some of them, it isn't. Now, where's Young? See, your talk, where you had those buttons, this is where the fault is. Click on here, and it'll tell you. That's the sort of thing people need. And not because they're stupid, but because they haven't got time to waste fiddling around trying to find what's wrong. So this is not about people's level of stupidity, it's about how busy they are. It's about the support they need so they can be in a flow of work. What tasks are they going to do? A whole range of them. They might be building tests, they might be running tests, they might be looking at results of testing, they might be managing fault reports, they might be assessing risk. If you're a test manager or a stakeholder or product owner, you might not want to do anything about running tests, but you might want to get an overview that says, this is the level of residual risk you've got. And you don't want to be in a position where everything's marked as green for go when actually no tests have run. You might be checking for completion. How near are we to releasing? So think about the tools that you're using at the moment. How well do they actually do that? And how much are you having to bend what you do in order to fit with what the tool tells you? What emotions are people feeling? That picture at the top, the people in the suits, that's a group in the States working out of North Carolina State University who call themselves the Developers Liberation Front. And they're working on things to do with improving the tool set. Interestingly, they're working on the programming and coding tools. They're not working on testing tools. So I've had a couple of conversations with them, about what we can do to improve. And it's brilliant to see people starting to do it, to see people starting to make actually tools, building them themselves, which start to think about some of these areas. It's great. What attributes are important? So when we think about the attributes of a piece of software, as testers, as IT people, we think about functionality and performance and security and a lot of other words that frankly don't mean anything to the rest of the population, but we like them and we can measure them. On top of that, we can put a layer of quality and use, where we're thinking about usability, safety, freedom from risk, accessibility. I had a problem in a project a couple of years ago. I had a couple of colleagues who have visual impairments. Could I find a tool to support agile methodologies that actually allowed you to use a screen reader? No. So we're back to using Excel spreadsheets again in order to make allow agile methods, allow sharing of information. And above that, we have an area called the user experience design where we start talking in terms of emotion. So that could be seductiveness and pleasure and excitement, but for a tool set, it's more likely to be credibility, trustworthiness, flow, being able to do your work without thinking about the tool set because you're just able to take that for granted and drive the car. It's like, with an automatic gearbox, you don't have to think about changing gear. You just drive the car. It's that type of thing that we could look for in what supports us in our tool sets. And when we've looked at those attributes, we can start actually looking and saying people have different needs. So we can make a little graph like this and we can compare. This might be what the test manager finds most important in terms of their experience of the test tool. They might be looking at valuableness and trust, the usefulness, the flow. An automation specialist will have a slightly different profile because they're more confident in what they're using. And a senior stakeholder, who might be the person who's buying the tool, they may well be looking at the desirability, the prettiness of it. So one of the problems we have with tool purchasing is when you look at what vendors do, they emphasize aspects of usability that aren't necessarily the most useful thing. So we have an illusion of usability that works well in a sales demo, but when you come to actually try and do real work with it, it doesn't quite work out. Okay? So those sorts of things are interesting to think about. Because they've got different user experience needs, they have different quality in use scores. And then they have different internal or product quality scores in the same way. So here's an interesting thing. When you're acquiring, building, or purchasing a tool, do you do performance testing on it before you buy it or start using it? Do you do interoperability testing on it to see if it works with the rest of your tool set? It's a software acquisition project, getting a test tool in. You should do it like you do all the other software testing, all the other software projects that you do. So actually thinking about how we test this tool. Actually, we test it in the same way that we do any other bit of software. And those attributes that are important in other bits of software, they're just as important in our tools. So we would want to do some usability testing. We will want to test the learnability. How quickly are we going to get up and running with this? We might want to test the security. And we can start putting together some rich user stories. Now, I did a workshop earlier today, so some of you have seen this sort of thing. But what I like to do in user experience work is do user stories which are about the emotions that the users are feeling, not about, or not yet, about the details of what they're trying to do. So this is not a user story about we click on this and that screen comes up. This is a user story at the top level about the experience. So, as a domain specialist tester, I want to use software development and test tools that provide me with information in my domain language. I'm a specialist in finance. I've come from the banking industry. I want my information in that language. I don't want it in IT language. That don't force me to engage with technical issues. That provide information for the developers that they and I can trust. That don't make me feel stupid. Don't want the tool to make me feel stupid, it's a tool. There's a joke somebody made about Internet of Things and wearables, saying, I don't want to live in a world where my trousers are more intelligent than I am. So that we make decisions we both trust without interrupting our flow of work. That's a really useful user story. It's telling you a lot about the experience that you want from this tool. It's not telling you about how the tool's going to work, not telling you what you're going to click on or what the screens look like. It's telling you, this is my fundamental principle about how I want this tool to be. And that will make you think about functional suitability and usability and effectiveness and conformance and flow and credibility and trust. And those are all characteristics that you can test for. From the user story, we start drawing out what characteristics are important for this particular test automation user. And there's a method called heuristic evaluation. You can use this on any interface. It's very easy. It's 10 simple heuristics to remember about what you need to consider when you're building an interface. Because you've had a long and exhausting evening, I'm not going to go through those in detail. I'm just going to say, if you've not come across these before, get onto the NN Group website and find out about these, because they've been around for years and they are fundamental as a set of heuristics for understanding user experience and usability. And they're dead easy to use. If you use these as a checklist in a review of any interface, you'll very quickly find what's good and what's not good about them. Okay, there's a method called NASA TLX, developed by NASA. You can download the information for this from the internet really easily. This is also worth looking into. It's about the mental workload and the physical workload when you're using any tool. It's dead easy to use. Dead easy to ask people to fill in. You can do scoring from it. There's lots of different versions that you can download that are done in slightly different ways. One that's specifically for iPhones, others that you can use for other sorts of application. But I really recommend looking into this for your tool set, but actually for any sort of software you're building. So, I've set the scene. I've introduced you at high speed to a method you can think about, and I've got some discussion points for you. So, do we want 21st century tools for our development projects, both for the coders, the designers, and for the testers? Do we want it to be like a Kia production line, and have automatic gearboxes and press buttons and perhaps cars that can drive themselves, test automation that actually has some intelligence in it. Do we want those things? I mentioned Tarek King's keynote he's going to do. One of the things he talks about is artificial intelligence. Is it a machine learning? Is that going to be the tester's enemy or the tester's friend from the point of view of jobs? But actually, what have we got out there that can really help us deal with the problem of this Internet of Things? Deal with the complexity we're having to deal with. That's really going to support us and not, as I've seen with many people struggling with tools, hold up the whole process to the point where it becomes shelfware because it's quicker to do it manually. Testing is about skilled craftsmanship. It could be about automation and tooling. It could be about being accurate and reliable. It's going to continue to be heavily relied on. It's going to continue to cost money, so overall the automation and tooling needs to save us money, not cost us money. It needs to be easy to operate. So I think we can build a future where the automation genuinely supports us and we can drive the car. Yes, I really think that. I don't think we're there yet. What am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to be interviewing people, doing surveys, reading literature, researching ideas, trying out, maybe get as far as prototyping, talking to guys like yourselves who are building things about what you're doing about this. And I'm going to ask and listen and record and code and refine and test and publish and feedback. And I'm going to be going round that for the next 6 to 8 years. I hope in talks like this influencing anybody who is building tools. And I hope eventually coming to a point where I can come out with some information during that 6 to 8 years, which perhaps helps the industry. Who knows? What I might find is there's not a problem because you youngsters have sorted it out and us oldies can just retire quietly and go and live by the seaside. Who knows? So lots of references to prove I've read. That was a fast thing. Thanks for listening.